Just love that. And in the spirit of Mother's Day, I'm going to wish my mom, Connie, a happy Mother's Day. I love my mom because she showed me what unconditional love is. If I was to give my mom a present, well, I won't tell you what I got her this year. It's actually, yeah, I will. It's a Lowe's card. But don't think that's bad. That's not for me. She loves to work outside, and if I could give her anything, and if she was here, I would be spending probably this afternoon out in her yard planting stuff and moving stuff and weeding and getting her yard the way that she likes it. But had an amazing mom, and I love you, Mom. And you have the opportunity. We're not going to ask anybody to shake hands, but you know what? You guys can go hug your mom. If you're with your mom, go hug her. Tell her you love her. It is Mother's Day, and I wanted to wish every mother Mother's Day, and I wanted to challenge everyone who has a mother, reach out to them whatever way you can so you can demonstrate how much you do care about them. It's a real opportunity to do that. Well, we are in a series called Anchor, and we are anchoring ourselves to Christ. And as we think about that and the reality of what an anchor is for, we're going to answer some of those questions. We're going to maybe take some stock and evaluate where we are. Certainly the situation that we find ourselves with COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders and all the things that are going on and the uncertainty, the insecurity. And it's interesting to see how different people respond to that. We've got people all over the spectrum. And some of it has to do with their personality, extroverts, introverts. But people are all over the place with what they're feeling and what they're going through. And it's not just situational. There's a lot of internal things going on. And so this really is a perfect time to evaluate. And one thing I've learned in my life, and I've seen in my own experience, and the experience of others as well, that when I am put in a new situation, I'm much more open to new possibilities. I'm open to new ideas. Yes, it's unsettling. I don't feel comfortable in it. And because I'm uncomfortable, it actually allows me to see things maybe more clearly. It also has a tendency to make me frustrated and impatient and some other negative things. But it is a real time to see where we truly are anchored. We started this series a few weeks ago. And when we started, we were looking at Hebrews chapter 6. And I'm just going to go back to those first three verses, 18 through 20, and read those to you as the backdrop for what we're talking about. And we're going to focus in on the hope and the anchor in this sentence, in these verses. It says this in verse 18. So God has given both his promise and his oath. These two things are unchangeable because it is impossible for God to lie. Therefore, we who have fled to him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. This hope is strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. It leads us through the curtain to God's inner sanctuary. Jesus has already gone in there for us. He has become our eternal high priest in the order of Melchizedek. And I'm not going to talk about Melchizedek. I'm not going to talk about that order. What I'm going to talk about are the things that we can count on, the things that we can be anchored to. Scott began this series and he said there are two things that are trustworthy. There are two things that are strong and sure, and that is God and his word. He's made an oath. He's made a promise. He keeps his word, and he's able to keep his word because he's all powerful. And as we went through that, we looked at God's character. Denny then shared and talked about prayer and how that connects us with this anchor who is God himself. We then, last week, looked at three characters, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that had an anchor in their lives, an anchor that was so strong and they held so tightly. They held so tightly to that anchor that they were able to trust God in the face of a decree of a king that they would be put to death if they didn't worship him as God. And they said no. And ultimately they were thrown into a fiery furnace. It's a story we heard often as a kid. And what a great reminder that God, this anchor that we're talking about, is more powerful. He's more powerful than the decree of a king. He's more powerful than a fiery furnace. And they came out touched because they were anchored. And Christ was there in their midst, actually in that furnace. So that's what we looked at. And I want to just focus now, like I said, on hope and the anchor, and talk about those two things. So verse 19, I'm going to read it to you. It says this: "This hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. It leads us through the curtain into God's inner sanctuary." I would be remiss if I did not start by saying, when we talk about the anchor, who is God himself, the reason we're able to have that anchor is because of what Christ has done. This idea of going into this inner sanctuary after the order of Melchizedek, that idea, that concept, that's talking about the holiest place that was in the temple. It was the holiest place in the tabernacle. And only the high priest could go in there once a year to offer a sacrifice. And then he would come out, and they could only do that once a year. And he had to do that for the whole nation. This is different. Everything changed when Christ went to the cross. Everything changed. He went in there for us, not just once, and then every year he goes back in. He went once, and finally, he went in there once forever. And he opened the door to God's presence for all of us who believe in Christ. All of us who've placed our faith in what Christ has done. That's what he's done for us. He's taken our place. And now, because he took our place, forgave us our sins, took the punishment of our death for those sins, gave us his righteousness, gave us his sonship, that we are now sons and daughters of God in the same way that Jesus is God's son. And now we can boldly enter in. So when we talk about the access we have to the anchor, that's for believers. But that access comes through Jesus Christ. Now, as we think about this metaphor of an anchor, what comes to your mind? What do you think of? We have a picture of a sailing vessel that would have been about the first century. It's not exactly what I had in mind when I was looking for them and had some options, but this is a large vessel. And it carried cargo, it carried people, and it was very seaworthy. Unless there was a storm. This is not a mechanical boat, meaning there are no mechanics to move this other than the wind and the current in the ocean. That's all there is to move it. And so what would happen if a storm would come? One of the primary ways and the safest way they could get out of that, they're being pushed on. The seas are raging and they're rough. They had to drop an anchor to keep from being bashed and shipwrecked and potentially losing their lives in a storm because they couldn't stop, because they had no way of stop, because the wind and waves just kept pushing them. So I don't know if that picture gave you a good rendering, but think of that in a storm. Think of the inability to power yourself away from danger. An anchor for them in that time, that's what that was for. And it's important for us to notice that, to put ourselves in that context. In fact, the context of the book, just briefly, it's Hebrews, and it was written to Jewish believers. You see, the Jewish nation had rejected Jesus as the Messiah. They'd rejected him. But still, some of the Jewish people put their faith in Christ and became his children, were a part of the church. But they were about to go through a tremendous storm. This is 68 AD, and 70 Titus is going to destroy Jerusalem. And Israel will not be a country for another 1,800 years. They're going to be dispersed, the great dispersa. They're not going to have this, and they need hope. And it's the context of that. As you think about a boat, you think about the sea, right? The ocean, the waves, the storms. That's what you should be thinking. And it's funny because there's another metaphor in Scripture that talks about a house representing your life, and that you should build it on firm foundation. You should build it on the rock. Don't build it on the sand. A fool builds on the sand, but a wise man builds his house upon the rock. That seems like a much better idea to me than getting in a boat, even with an anchor. People particularly in that period of time, they would get in a boat and they would never come back. It's very, very dangerous. So why is God using a metaphor here? Why does he want us to picture ourselves and our lives like a boat? I believe there's several reasons, and one of them is it's just a better metaphor. Why? Because God is taking us places. He isn't just leaving us in one spot. He didn't just save us and, okay, now live your life right where you're at. Stay here. You're great. I've saved you. I'll see you when you die in eternity in heaven. It's great. Just no. God is moving us. He has purpose for us. He sends us out. He's sending you. He's given you a purpose. He has a purpose for you. And I'm not talking to just the adults. I'm talking to teenagers. I'm talking to grade schoolers. I'm talking to everyone. God has a purpose and a plan for you. And he's going to move you. He's going to send you places on his mission, on his purpose. So the boat moves, and so that makes it a better metaphor. But actually the ocean, as scary as it is, particularly in that time, as dangerous as it was, it's actually a much better metaphor for our lives. Right? Don't we go through hardship? Don't we go through storms? Yeah, sure, there's some sunny days and there's a breeze at our back. We have those too. And everything seems right and calm and good. And we can watch the sunrise or the sunset. But then the storms come and we are in danger. That's more real, isn't it? We've all gone through storms in our lives. Some of you very big, long-lasting storms. Some of us less. But regardless, that's the metaphor. And so you think about what's happening. And so we have a picture of an anchor, because this is one of the most important items on a boat. So there's two things that an anchor is supposed to do. We mentioned one briefly. It's to prevent you from hitting the rocks in a storm. But there's another. This is a simpler, it's just not as flashy. But one of the purposes of an anchor was to keep the boat from drifting. You see, without an anchor, boats drift. And I grew up in Iowa, right where the Iowa River comes in the Mississippi River. And then I worked on a towboat right out of high school and then through college. And I know about currents and drifting. It's actually, it's not a good thing. You don't want to be drifting. You're not going where you want to go if you're drifting. And drifting is dangerous because you don't even notice it. It's usually so slow that you don't actually notice it. But an anchor that you're secured to, even in current, even in a river, keeps you where you need to be. We drift in our life. I wanted to ask you, where do you drift? Maybe over the last few weeks with all the changes you've recognized, man, how did I get here? Like, how did I end up here? This is not what I wanted. This is not where I wanted to be in my career. This is not where I wanted to be with my relationship with my wife. This is not where I wanted to be with my relationship with Christ. I knew what he was wanting from me and sending me on, and I'm nowhere near that. That's because you've been drifting. I've had those seasons in my life where I was just drifting, not paying attention. And drifting is dangerous. We drift away, and it's always away. Do you notice that? It's always away from the things that we want. You see, the winds and the waves of the world are pushing us away from God's things. It's pushing us away from the good thing. It's drifting and pulling us away from his things. And then, of course, our own hearts. The current of our own hearts and our own lives take us to places we don't want to end up. We have an opportunity to wake up to those fact that we are drifting and recognize that if we aren't intentional, we will drift. You know, it's funny, I was thinking about my daughter's wedding a lot. She just got married last weekend. And it was weird, I'll be honest, with the COVID-19, his family and just 3 other people. And it was beautiful. You know, it was sappy, and I mean, that's how I felt. It's kind of like sad and happy. I put those together. I didn't know what to feel. I was happy. We really liked Tyler, but I've spent most of my life protecting my daughter from the Tylers of the world, right? And so now all of a sudden he's going to be my son-in-law, right? And all this is going on. I don't know what to think about it. And as they were giving their vows, I just thought, wow, how how amazing if they just keep their vows to love each other, care about each other, honor each other, respect each other, love each other, to grow closer together. And they're on their honeymoon right now, and they're thinking that's their next 30 years. They can't even imagine anything but that. But for those of us who've been married longer than a honeymoon, right, or a year or two, we recognize that we drift. No one starts off to move away so far away from a spouse, someone who they love so much and wanted to spend the rest of their lives with, even made a commitment in front of God and other people that this is what we want. But they've drifted. Meryl and Tyler can't even imagine drifting at this point. But if they're not intentional and they're not anchored to God, they will. They'll drift apart. That's what happens. And so drifting is very dangerous. And one of the things that adds to the danger, adds to the complexity, is that a boat is hooked to an anchor for a reason. It has a specific role, two roles. One, to keep you from drifting. The other is to keep you safe in a storm. But there's other things on the water. Let me ask you, and I'm being a little facetious. Do you know the difference between a buoy and an anchor? Of course you do. We all do. But you know what we in truth do and practice in our lives? We see a buoy and we mistake it for an anchor. And we hold on to it, thinking that that'll secure us. Hey, let me tell you something about a buoy. It won't secure a ship. It'll move the buoy. It'll just pull it with it. And you think, hey, I'm secure. I'm attached to this buoy, and it's keeping us on course. In fact, we're not drifting. See, the buoy's still right there. It's because it's drifting with you in the current, in the waves. It does no good. And that's a brand new buoy. It hasn't been out there very long because most of the buoys that we go after are pretty shiny. I've had buoys in my life. You have them in yours. As I was thinking about what were some of those, how about a career? Something that we've depended on or counted on, or maybe even our reputation around our career or what we have, our possessions. You know, a 401k can be a buoy. It seems like that's your security, right? You've got all that money there, and you know you could stop working today and still have enough. And you think, well, maybe, but I'm going to keep working, and I'm hanging on to that. That's going to be security. Have you looked at your 401k lately? Don't today. It'll ruin Mother's Day, I'm guessing. Because the more you had, the more you lost. It's not an anchor, and when that storm blows, it doesn't hold you. You're just pushed by the waves onto the rocks. We could use lots of examples and metaphors that would help us to do this. Lots of things that we have in our lives that we hold on to thinking it'll help us. But if it isn't the Lord Jesus Christ, God himself is our anchor, we're anchoring in the wrong things. And that's what those buoys are in our life. Anything that we are putting our confidence in, anything we're trying to hold on to that we think keeps us safe, those are the things. Sadly, we often don't know that we're drifting or have buoys in our life until a storm hits. And when that storm hits, we recognize it. So the question is, at that point, is it too late? When your world comes crashing down, is it too late? I have been drifting. I find myself clear over here. I never intended to be so far from the people I love and the thing that God had for me to do and who I am as a person. I never wanted to get there. Is it too late? Now that the storm comes, how do I get back? Guess what? We have hope. We have hope. And that hope is what gets us connected back to the anchor. You see, the hope is the rope that connects us to the anchor. So we're going to talk about anchors and ropes. We're talking about hope now. You see, even when the storm comes, even if you've drifted, even if you've been finding your security in other things and your identity in other things, your job, your career, your family, possessions, and retirement, all those things, even if you've done that, guess what? It's not too late. You can grab a hold of the rope and hold fast to that rope. Now, that brings us to the question, and I want us to think about this. And it says this in Hebrews 6. And I'm going to read just B and then A out of 18 and 19. It says this: Therefore, we who have fled to him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. This hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for the soul. Just going to stop there with the reading. You see, when the storm comes, that's when we need it the most. And that's most often when we seek refuge. And that's all it takes. No matter where you are at in this process, that's all it takes is to seek refuge in him and hold on to that rope. Now, that rope needs to be strong. Our hope needs to be confident in him, not wishful thinking, not Pollyannaism. It can't be any of that. It's actually confidence in God and who he is. And not just that he's able and capable, but that he cares and that he knows and that he loves. God's promise to us. Hope. Hope is the rope that tethers us to that anchor. We have to have hope. Now, in saying that, having to, it's imperative. That is an imperative, absolutely necessary. But there's 10 things that can cause us to lose hope. And I wanted to quickly go through these. These aren't mine. Rick Warren put these together a few years ago after doing a lot of research. So go ahead and look at this list with me. And as we go through this, I just want you to be reminded. I just want you to think about which things have happened to you and how it caused you to respond. Did it cause you to take refuge in him and hold on to the rope, or did it cause you to lose hope? Let's go through these. Number 1, you feel alone and abandoned. Again, you feel alone and abandoned. It doesn't mean you are alone. It just means you feel alone. You could be in a room full of people, but you feel abandoned. You feel like you're on your own. That can lead to hopelessness. That can cause you to lose hope. That can cause you to let go of that rope. Number 2, life seems out of control. Yes, I have been there. I have felt alone before, and now, I've got the first 2. Life seems out of control, doesn't it? When you don't feel like you have any say or any control of anything that's happening to you, or your family, or your kids, that you have to have a wedding in somebody's backyard, right? With just the family. Wait a minute, it is out of control. All these plans, all that was going to happen, gone. 3, you don't see a purpose. If you have a driven personality at all, this is a big one. I have experienced this. When I didn't have a purpose, it doesn't take long for me to lose hope. How about you? How about you don't have what you need? And that can mean your health too, by the way. That's how that has gotten me before. That's what caused me to lose hope in situations where I don't have my health, don't have the things I need. And maybe you need something right now. You need a job. You need a paycheck. You need enough money for rent. You need enough money for the mortgage or the car payment. You need that. You have needs and it's not being met and you don't know how it's going to be met. That can lead to hopelessness. And you failed again. I've been there. This has to do with temptation, right? The failing, I keep wanting to stop being angry or frustrated and impatient. I want to not be lustful. I want to not yell at my kids. I want to be a loving, gentle person. I want to be a good pastor. I want to be a good worker. I want to be a good friend. All these things, and yet I find myself failing and failing. We find ourselves failing and failing and failing in these areas over and over. That can lead to hopelessness. Like, why bother? I've tried for years. Certainly addictions fall into that. The scourge of an addiction, that's part of it. It takes away people's hope that nothing can change. Number 7, deeply wounded by someone. It only makes it worse when they're supposed to love us. And it often is the people that are supposed to love us the most that wound us the most deeply. That can cause us to lose hope. If that person who loved me could do this, what can I expect from others? And then hounded by fear. And I know some of you right now, that's where you're at. You are hounded by fear. Maybe not just for yourself, of maybe getting a virus, but maybe someone you love. Fear. Worry and fear. And then when it looks like defeat, like it looks like it isn't going to matter. it looks like it's going to matter. And I wonder if you've experienced those. Don't know how many you've experienced. I've experienced a lot of those. And I wanted to just end with a story. And it's very personal to me. And I want to share it for you. It's also good for me to talk about. As we finished up our time in Papua New Guinea, we had been there for 17 years. And we had seen God do a miracle after miracle. He always kept us safe. He always provided for us. He did things that if I told you, you would be skeptical. You'd think, well, maybe that can't be right. I've seen God do amazing things. And I know him. I know him well. I know that anchor. I know what kind of anchor he is, steadfast and unmovable. I know all those things. And as we got to see God work and plant churches in Papua New Guinea, we were finishing up the translation. God opened a door for us, for Karen and I, to be a part of the international leadership team with New Tribes Mission, which is now ethnos 360. And I want to say it was my dream job. Not that I always dreamed about having that job. I just mean in the sense of it was such a good fit. It's the kind of job that you love to do, you look forward to doing. It wasn't hard to do in that sense. It came very natural to me. It fit my gifts, it fit my personality. I love the team that I was on and working with. There's just so many good things. And best of all, we were still being able to connect. We still got to connect with that thing that always had compelled us. That call that we felt on God had on our lives to go to the least reach. We got to be involved with that by leading and by consulting and actually developing leadership teams to give leadership to people who were doing the things that we had just done. I was thrilled. I was thankful. To make it even better than that, we got to do that job from America. That's wonderful. To go from Papua New Guinea, and I was on that team and having to travel from there, it was very difficult, and still working on translation, still very preoccupied, but now we're moving home. And so 2011, we moved back to Winona Lake. And we get to be here, and we're going to reconnect with family, our church family, you guys. We're going to have electricity. We're going to have a car. We're going to have grocery stores. We're going to have restaurants. You can't imagine the places we're going to go and eat. Our kids are going to be in normal schools, and they're going to get to school, and they're going to fit in, and on and on. It was wonderful. It was a great time. And then, part of my job, I went to Indonesia for a month. And it's longer than I wanted to go, but that's what was necessary to do the job. And so I left and went, and we did a workshop at a nice 5-star hotel, and then we traveled, and the new model was to take these leaders and take them into the locations where the missionaries are planting tribal churches, to see people reached with the gospel and churches go on to maturity. That's what we were doing, and we made 4 stops. But after the first stop, and almost a week there, I started to feel sick. By the time we got to the second location, which again is really isolated, helicopter-only access, I thought I had malaria. So I took anti-malarials. I didn't get better. I actually got worse. And by the third location, my knees were so swollen and my joints were so swollen I couldn't put on like regular pants. I could only wear shorts. And I was sick, and I was getting sicker. And I wish I had the sense to say, I can't continue. I need to get out and get some help. But we pressed on. I'd gone all that way. I didn't want to not see those families. And so we ended up going to that next location and spending a few more days there. And by the time I got out to where there was medical help, I was really sick. Really, really sick. I ended up having typhus. And the infection ended up going into my nervous system. And so it caused tremendous nerve pain. It caused huge swelling, like I said, in my joints, and I have some neurological problems. As I'm on my way home, which I wasn't even sure I would be able to get home, I find out that Karen's mom has been diagnosed with cancer. I've also found out that Karen has had it with the kids. They're high schoolers, junior high. We thought it was great to come home to America. This wasn't their home. We had uprooted them out of Papua New Guinea, their home, and now they're living in America, and they're going to school here. and they don't like it, and they are struggling. I get home, things are unraveling in the home, and I couldn't do my job. I got sicker and sicker, and I'm going to experts and specialists, and no one can find out what's happening. Every step I took, it felt like my ankles, knees, and hips were full of broken glass. Terribly painful. And I felt myself doing this. I felt myself not just drifting, but being blown by a wave. And you think about all that I've seen God do and all that I know about him, it would have been so easy just to grab onto him and hold on. But I didn't. I was mad. This is not what I wanted. And that dream job I had, I can't even do it now. I can't hardly walk, let alone travel. And I don't have the concentration ability and the ability to think and to even speak clearly to actually do any of this through email or Skype or anything. And I was isolated. I felt abandoned, not by Karen, not by this church, not by my family, but by God himself. And I could go down through that list and say, these were how I was feeling. And that continued for several months, and it turns up to be August, and I didn't really have much of the strength, and I didn't know what was happening. I wish I could look back then and tell myself what was going on. I thought, man, am I depressed? Am I just discouraged? No, I think I'm just sick, and I don't know. And I was laying in bed one night, and the phone rings. It's a call from Papua New Guinea. Not uncommon for them to call in the middle of the night here, which is daytime there. And as the person began to talk, I realized that this was not a good phone call. They were telling me that one of my best friends in a boat full, 6 other people that I know and love are missing. They had gone to an island. And then they came back and they left that island, and it's 22 miles of open ocean, and they're in a little boat, a 21-foot boat, and they're coming back, and they haven't been seen for, it was about 36 hours at that time. We did everything we could. They don't have a Coast Guard in Papua New Guinea, and so we asked and paid for a helicopter. We paid for a plane. We paid for boats to go and do a search for my friend and his sister and another friend, our neighbor and his daughter and another elder in the church and people we loved, to go look for them and see if they couldn't find them. Maybe they were still alive. And as time went on, it became increasingly clear that wasn't going to happen. They called off the surgeon and says, no, we're not going to go back. There's no reason. The seas are horrible. It's rough. They are gone. And I lost all hope. I knew better. I knew all I had to do was hold on to that anchor, but I didn't. I can't tell you all the reasons. I'm not even sure I know all those reasons. And I'd love to tell you this story. Ended like a week later. I recognized that, and I went and I sought God, and I hold on, and that changed everything. It didn't. I don't know exactly how long it was, but it wasn't days or weeks. It was months. And I do remember just shortly before Christmas, being so broken, still sick, grieving the loss of people I loved, grieving the loss for the church. These were leaders in the church. I got to lead Ketuku to Christ. He had 5 kids and a wife. I got to lead him to Christ, and I got to disciple him. And he was our first missionary. He was like our senior pastor for that church. And he's gone. I lost hope. Depressed for sure. Angry, yes. Frustrated. I could go on and on. Finally, I began to come to my senses. And in that process, I realized I had put a lot of confidence. I had things in my life, like my career and what I was doing and what I was accomplishing for God, that had taken the place of himself. That I had buoys that I tied up to. And that's why when the storm came, it blew me so far onto the rocks. And I could have been shipwrecked. But then, Hebrews 6, 19 and 18 came to mind. I'm going to read just part of that. It says this: therefore, Because God is who he says he is. He cannot lie. He always does what he says. He's capable. He's powerful. He loves me. He loves you. That God says that he's an anchor. You can trust him. Therefore, we who have fled to him for refuge. That's what I did. Just in December of that year of 2011, I fled to him. I fled to him for refuge. I had nowhere else to go. I'd given up even on him, and I found hope again in him. I fled to him for refuge. And those that do that can have great confidence as we hold to the rope that lies before us. This hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. Hold fast. Hold fast to hope. I don't know where you are in that progress. I don't know what's going on in your life. I know a lot. Wherever you find yourself, even if you've lost hope and you're drifting, even if you haven't been paying attention and you're drifting, you're in the middle of a storm right now, don't lose hope. Hold fast to that anchor. Seek your refuge in him. He's faithful. He's reliable. And he is good. You know some of the rest of the story. You know what God has done in our lives since then, and we have so much more to be grateful for. We still carry some of those scars. We're not the same. But I know that my hope in him is secure because he is faithful and unmovable. Have a great Mother's Day. Look forward to seeing you sometime soon. But for now, we'll keep doing this. Be encouraged. Tell your mom you love her if you can.